So essentially, to sum that up, it's personality disorders are not formed out of nowhere, and a lot of it has to do with the attachment style, or from our childhood, how our caregivers were with us. There are relation, right? Like,
And I've gone through on several videos on my channel, and I've gone through the symptoms of
oh,
NPD and BPD, and I've talked about what could those symptoms actually be communicating, and how could they have developed out of trauma? Because people who are diagnosed with personality disorders, rightly or wrongly, are pathologized. And there are a lot of treatment programs, for example, that won't take people who have a personality disorder. And I'm like, but it's trauma, you know? um, and, people who are in active addiction often appear, their behaviors often appear antisocial.
yes.
Why? Because I need to keep my drug. I
Yeah.
need to keep my whatever. And if you don't like it, tough tiddlywinks.
Mhm.
Um, so that can come off as antisocial. They are foregoing things that are important and relationships that are important to get their drug. Um, and that's hurtful to the people who get kind of cast aside, but it's not because they don't love them. It's because
Right.
they can't survive. Once you become tolerant on that substance, once your nervous system actually adjusts to being in active addiction, then when you're not using,
Mm.
you are in acute withdrawal or post acute withdrawal, depending on how long it's been, but you don't feel the same. And many people use whatever the addiction is, many people use to numb pain. So when you stop using and the pain's there and you're going, what do I do? And numbing the pain, the only way you know how, seems to be the only way to survive. And those that are on the outside may perceive it as, oh, my love's not enough. Well, no, it's not actually, because it's not all about you. Thank you very much. Um,
Oh my gosh, I love you. You're so funny. Um, Someone else asked about codependency. What is codependency? Is it? I mean, I have such mixed feelings about it. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but I don't know how I feel about it.
Essentially, I'm the shorthand version, I guess, is I liken it to relationship addiction.
Okay,
Co
that makes sense.
Codependency is when somebody uses a relationship in order to help themselves feel safe and secure. And a lot of people who experience trauma when they were growing up, a chaotic childhood, if they weren't the one doing it, it didn't get done. If they weren't taking care of controlling things, it was unsafe. So they learn those skills and they carry them into adulthood. Then they get into relationships with people who tolerate that behavior, who are generally struggling themselves, and repeat the pattern. If you do what I say, then you'll be okay.
Right.
If you know, act right. And then if you don't take my advice, because it does come from a place in their heart, it totally comes from the right place. They're not trying to be harmful or hateful. They're trying to fix you.
Mhm.
And they weren't able to fix their caregivers or the person that led them to develop these behaviors, which could be later in life. Um,
Right.
So sometimes it's repeating the past trying to get a different result. Insanity.
Wow. Yeah, that's so okay. So what about, so we talked about how, what questions do you guys have? Which direction? Because there's so many different directions I could go in. Let me see if there's any questions so far, that, because I want to talk about, so how does the trauma bonding happen specifically? Like, if you could explain that, like, in a,
Okay.
is it only with narcissists? Is it only like, what, everybody relates them together. Why is that? Like, it's Can it be with anybody?
Narcissists, yeah, anybody who's abusive.
Okay, okay, that makes sense.
Um, there has to be a trauma going on in the person's life, and whether that person is even neglectful, a neglectful parent, who's, not meeting the child's needs, the child is in this fear state, and a trauma bond forms between the two of them where the child says, I can't survive without you. So I need to figure out what I need to do to make you stay. And I can't survive without you. And that just keeps repeating itself in that relationship. So every time they try to disconnect, the child is drawn right back because they're like, I can't survive without you. And trauma bonds are developed as a result of ongoing distress and trauma, whereas Stockholm syndrome, which I think a lot of people are familiar with,
Mhm.
typically involves one acute, really stressful event. Um, with a trauma bond, the person who develops that bond starts empathizing with the abuser, um, and starts questioning their own sanity, questioning their own perceptions, and oh, it must not be that bad. It could be worse, whatever else they're hearing. Um, but because it was developed in a way that ultimately the person who was causing the trauma was also the rescuer.
Mm,
And that really screws with your brain.
wow.
You help me and you hurt me at the same time. How's that work? Um, and it makes it a lot harder to get over, a lot harder to break, and until you start recognizing uh, what the facts are versus what your perceptions are. Can you survive?
Why is that so
You know, you
hard
can-
for us to do, like, in a relationship to see, like, this isn't it's almost exactly what you said of, um, this person, we when we start to realize, "Oh, I'm in pain because of the relationship with this person," right? Whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, it's like an unease of, I need that person to make me feel better too, like exactly what you're just saying. So how do you break that? Like how do you even know? Because that was the hardest thing for me ever to even agree with and accept.
and I think you said it part of it earlier.
Yeah.
It's very similar to alcohol.
Yeah.
When you start using alcohol, it numbs the pain and it seems like it's a good fit. And then you start realizing you get that unease one day that maybe this ain't working for me. And you quit and you go through detox and, suffer through the post acute withdrawal. And then somewhere along the way, you reach a place where you're feeling overwhelmed again
Yeah.
and you numb it with alcohol. And with the relationship, with the trauma bond, a lot of times you detox from it and then you reach a place where you start feeling, because you don't love yourself, because you don't have a secure attachment with yourself, you start reaching that place where you feel isolated and lonely and like nobody is ever going to love you. So you try to go back
Oh my
and
God.
hoping that person is going to change this time. And they ain't. You are playing, you're their little yo-yo, and they know you'll come back. They just have to kind of sit it out.
Yep. Wow. That's it's uh my chest. Um, that's exactly what was so confusing for me, in my experience was understanding why logically it didn't make sense. It's the same with all addictions for me. And then with the person to be like, well, I've already separated, but then my mind starts playing tricks on me. And then it's like, oh, I need this person. What is that? That's so that's what it is, right? It's like, oh, now I need this person. But then when I would have them back, it's like, it's like reality hits again. And I'm like, no, but I don't, I was right that I don't. It's weird.
And there can be a projection.
Yeah.
If you, for example, had a bad relationship with your father and you get into a relationship with somebody, as an adult, and in some ways they remind you of your dad. A
Yeah.
lot of us tend to, get in relationships with people who remind us of our parents. And if that starts falling apart, it's reopening those old trauma wounds from never connecting, never having that secure attachment with your father, um, which is a little Freudian in nature. But our brains don't just say, oh, okay, well, that didn't work, or as a child, if we're not able to connect with our caregiver, children take things personally. It
Yeah.
must be me. You
Yeah.
must have relapsed because of me. You must be angry because of me. You must have left because of me. That memory gets stored in the person's head. Maybe they try to keep it shoved back in a closet, but it's stored back there. And so when another relationship that's similar in some ways starts falling apart, those things that you told yourself as a child, that inner child starts screaming, I told you so. And a lot of times people will try to heal their childhood wounds in adult relationships. Recognizing as an adult, I recognize I can't fix my relationship with my dad for whatever reason, but let me try to do it here. Let me prove that it wasn't me.
Right.
Um,
That's
and that
exactly
can be,
what we talked about, that I felt that that's why it was deepening, right?
mhm.
Is it the same with mothers too? If the Okay, so it doesn't matter the sex, right?
And it doesn't matter whether it's an intimate relationship or not. If you had a problem with your mother
Yeah.
and you have a female friend who, you know, they can start triggering it.
Gotcha.
And it's important to be kind of aware of that. I had a supervisor um, several years ago that was a very strong woman
Mhm.
and kind of had some anger management issues, but in a lot of ways, she reminded me of my own mother. And I just desperately, desperately wanted her approval. But I was also desperately, desperately terrified at the same time.
Yeah.
And, um, when
Wow.
she would get mad, she would you could hear her screaming, like out in the lobby, screaming at people, um, which, not necessarily the most appropriate, um, but I just remember thinking, why is it that I care so much about what this person thinks about me? And then I realized I got mommy issues.
Yeah, that's exactly Oh, I love how you explain that. It's so true. That's exactly how, and we had talked about that too. And in my other therapist, I talked about that too. The connection between, um, is it almost like as if, I think you said it, that we couldn't, it's like recreating the same,
Mhm,
connection and over and
mhm.
over. And then, so how do you break that? That's probably a whole
The first
day of explanation, but
the first thing is to recognize what you're doing,
okay.
that you're trying to heal a relationship because we're born that our primary caregivers we're supposed to have an attachment with. And when
Right.
that attachment doesn't happen, that just sets a whole spiral in motion for our love map, if you will. So we may try to um, recreate things later, but recognizing when you're getting into similar relationships, when you're seeing or feeling something, what is that feeling coming from? Why is it that I need this person's approval so bad? Is it because I need their approval? Or are they reminding me of somebody whose approval I needed? Once you start becoming aware of it, then you got to grieve. You have to grieve the loss of that original relationship. And with fresh eyes as an adult, looking back, being able to say, you know what, it wasn't me. Um, Yeah, I may have done some really hurtful or crazy things as a kid, but that didn't mean I wasn't worthy of love.
Right.
And grieving the fact that you didn't have Warden June Cleaver as your parents.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of people, a lot of people um, end up having to go through that and accept you can't change the past.
Yeah.
So that's a whole grief process. Not only that you didn't have that childhood, but you didn't follow a different path because you didn't have that childhood. So we call those secondary losses.
Mhm.
What did you lose because you didn't have that support, because you didn't have that self confidence?
Right.
Um, Grieving that is really important in order to free yourself up from trying to fix it. And once you move on to uh, acknowledging it and healing that hurt, you won't need to try to recreate. You actually may see people that remind you of that person and go, "Oh no, that danger warning sign, Will Robinson, let me get out of here." Um,
Yeah.
and that's good. That's healthy. That's becoming more mindful of what's going on with you and why it's going on. Everything has a why, but sometimes you got to scratch your head and think about what it means, whether it's your feelings or your behaviors. And ultimately, at every experience we have gets filed somewhere in our brain,
Yeah.
and they get kind of mushed together to make what we call schema or shortcuts so we can anticipate what's going to happen next. If most of your memories are traumatic, are stressful, are, you know, unsupportive, then that's how you're probably those are the goggles that you're going to view the world through.
Yeah.
Um, and if your relationships with somebody that you really, desperately wanted approval with, is toxic,
Yeah.
then you may recreate that because, or expect it even, because you're trying to figure out how to fix it, trying to figure out how to make the hurt go away. And you
Yes.
can't do that with somebody new. You
Yeah.
got to grieve the past.
It doesn't work. And Mitch said something excellent here. I won't keep you too long. I know you probably have to
Oh, you're fine.
get going.
And
Okay.
grieve for losing yourself in the relationship. That
Yeah.
is so very true.
Wow.
Um, so often, and that's true for the childhood relationship too. You lost
Yeah.
who you were, um,
Yeah.
trying to be whatever your caregiver wanted you to be. And that's why a lot of people with mental health issues have a characteristic of being sort of a chameleon. They try to be whatever they think anybody wants them to be just to prevent abandonment.
Yeah. I can totally I that's one thing I've recognized. So another thing too is so I bet there's a lot of people here that have been through oh, look at what Don said. Most grieve the relationship but not themselves. That's such a good point.
Mhm.
Um Jean said
Similarly, um, before you go on to that,
yeah.
most people work on developing secure attachment with others, but not themselves. And
Ooh,
we need to be consistent, attentive, responsive, encouraging, and safe to ourselves.
yeah.
Sometimes the most damaging, abusive things that happen to you, that are said by you in your own head.
Yes. The inner critic. And then does isn't that usually like from like other people growing up that you hear in your head? I'm like motioning like this.
Yeah.
But so how can one reset the central nervous system? Oh, she has an excellent video or two on that I hold on, what's her name? Miss J. I didn't see, I can't tell which one she's posting, but if she could post some of those of your videos, that'd be awesome. Um complex PTSD, or thanks in advance. Yeah.
Releasing trauma trapped in your body. One of the things that happens, do we have a certain time we need to end?
No, I'm good. All we can go as long as you don't, I don't.
Yeah. Um, when somebody is in persistent fight or flee, the
Yeah.
vagus nerve, which is our relaxation nerve, becomes very weak, it becomes non responsive. It's like, what's the point? I'm going to go sleep. Um, So we talk about improving what they call vagal tone, and it's not a muscle, but it's the best, I guess, the best word we could come up with, and that's helping people activate that vagus nerve when necessary. Yoga, for example, and if you've got trauma, I'm would caution you before you do yoga to make sure that you feel safe doing it, because that focus on internal sensations can be really triggering. There is trauma focused yoga, but I digress. Yoga, when you're holding a pose or when you're trying to get into a pose, your stress response gets activated. After a little while, those muscles start going, ready to go. And breathing through it, activating that vagus nerve helps you reduce your heart rate so you can continue to hold that. When people chew gum, when people sing really loudly or scream really loudly, those are all things that can help trigger that vagus nerve. You can also put one finger on the little flappy thing in your ear, which is called the tragus, and one finger behind it, and you can rub. Now, you don't rub hard, just enough to move the skin, and it may give you a little tingly feeling. That's called auricular vagus nerve stimulation. But that can also help when you start feeling yourself getting stressed out. If you're not one that is into doing the square breathing or something, well, this is something you can do. Figuring out what can help you, because you're basically going to have to manually trigger that vagus nerve at first until it starts waking up and going, okay, this is no big deal. You know, I can handle this. And it can turn off the fight or flight response. The other thing that people usually overlook is when you're releasing trauma from your body, you're healing your HPA axis, you're healing your stress response. Now, when you were in that dysregulated state, that fight or flight state for so long, your brain basically remodeled itself. So think about having detours instead of going on the interstate. And when you start healing, the brain has to repave those paths and create, it's actually a process called neurogenesis, create new neurons that go a different way and that function based on different neurotransmitters. And your gut microbiome, when you're stressed, is altered, which alters the levels of different neurochemicals. There's a lot of blah, blah, blah to say sleep, nutrition, and actual physiological relaxation. Yes, it's important. Burning the candle at both ends is just going to trigger your stress response.
Yes.
Not having adequate sleep will trigger the stress response. And every time you do that, you're basically think of it like killing those neurons again. It may not be quite that extreme, but ultimately that's what you're doing. Your brain's trying to rebuild a new pathway. And then all of a sudden you go, no, let's go back and use this one again.
Yeah.
Like, what? What am I supposed to do? So we need to recognize that stress is physical as well as emotional, as well as cognitive. I think most of us have been in a class or a lecture or something that just seemed to go on forever. And by the end of the day, you felt like you'd been hit by a truck. You know, it's like, oh, I just want to go home and crawl in bed.
Yeah.
Your brain actually uses a whole lot of energy. It uses a whole lot of blood glucose. So whereas learning and doing things that are cognitively stimulating are important, don't get me wrong, but just like exercise, you can overdo it. Yeah. And it's important to pace yourself as you're getting back into things so you don't trigger that stress response unnecessarily. And you're allowing your body to heal. Think about it. If you break your arm, if you break your arm, you're going to put it in a cast and you're not going to use it. If you break your arm and you continue to go about work like nothing, you know, like you're not hurt, it's going to take a whole lot longer for those bones to knit back together. and your nervous system's no different. You need to try not to overtax it.
That's exactly. So it's like I know this stuff, but this morning I slept in so late. I mean, it wasn't even morning. I slept until like noon, and my mom's like texting me, like worried about me and everything. It's like, no, like my body, like I'm exhausted. My brain is just taxed. And you'd said, yeah, that's your nervous system and everything. It's like trying to heal. And it's like, duh. I totally didn't even think of it, because I'm like, this is really all this stuff, and the stress has really been wearing me down, and
Mhm.
the constant I don't know what word you would say, the chaos and everything, right? It's just
Mhm.
it's not something that I'm used to, and so it's a lot. And so I'm trying to be very nice to myself, right?
Good. And one of the challenging things when you are online, whether it's X or YouTube or whatever, is and we saw the same thing with Insta and Facebook way back when they first came onto the scene. That's 24/7 input, and
Yeah,
it's hard to relax if you're worried that you're going to be trolled. If
yeah,
you're worried that somebody's gonna do something awful, um, it's really hard to be able to relax, and that persistent fear or feeling of being unsafe, even though physically you're safe, your reputation, your friendships, your job might not be. That's freaking exhausting.
right. Yeah, it's a lot. And the need to want to correct people on the facts or this and that, it really is fruitless. And I remember you had said to me, don't feed the trolls. And I was like laughing so hard, but it's so true. And like I have a hard time doing that sometimes, but hey, it's a work in progress.
And
Yeah,
I think we all do. It's a natural reaction when somebody takes your power, you wanna
yeah,
snatch it back.
yeah.
Um,
And
but
keep trying.
stopping there, yeah. And you may have seen my video on acceptance and commitment therapy,
Yeah, I
where
love it a lot, actually.
ultimately it's you're asking yourself, "Is what I'm doing helping me move toward or away from what's important in my rich and meaningful life?" And I remember one time when my daughter was 11, um, I had some trolls and on Facebook. I wasn't on YouTube very much at that point, and I was like texting back, and I was getting all upset about things that they had said, sometimes not even texting. And
Mhm.
my 11-year-old daughter looks at me. She goes, "Mom, is getting upset about this helping you move toward or away from what's important?"
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
like, "Shut up."
Oh
I
my God,
didn't
I
say
love
shut up,
that.
but
No, I know. Silas
but
says stuff like that to me too, and he goes, "What are you upset about?" And I go, "Excuse me." They're
my
smart.
when my son was really little, I remember one day him being in the car seat and I got cut off in traffic and
Uh-huh.
I started like ranting at this person and this little voice from the back, "Mommy, they can't hear you."
I say that to my mom too. It's so true.
Well, it makes me feel better. But
It's so funny. They're too smart. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah, sometimes. But
I forget what you were
and
saying.
and I would agree with you, Mitch. Social media can make us have more difficulty focusing for any period of time and make it more difficult, partly because of the stress it causes a lot of people. When we're stressed, we can't focus. Our prefrontal cortex, our executive functioning, all that stuff that is amiss in people with ADHD, well, it goes amiss when we're stressed. So
Yeah,
if we're constantly stressed, if we're fearing missing out, and just the fact that it just scrolls and scrolls and scrolls, um, certainly contributes to our difficulty in uh, a lot of skills that are associated with ADHD. And I know myself, I've never had a long attention span, but it has gotten worse over the years. Yeah.
for sure. Well, there was one thing that you talked to me about. before, and you said about how when you're healing from something like a relationship, a friendship, or something with someone, like a toxic person or whatever, and you said something about needing to repeat your story, because I was getting a lot of pushback for talking about it, my situation, and what you had said. Will you repeat that again? I can't remember how you worded it. It's that people are saying like they're sick of hearing it, and I just want attention, and that
Right.
it's not true. And so, what would you say to that?
But this came from a grief class, so I'll just kind of back up to
Yeah.
where it came from, and from intro counseling. Intro counseling says that if you're working with somebody and you don't hear what they say the first time,
Mhm,
don't worry about taking notes, because if it's important, they'll bring it back up
mhm,
until they feel like it's been heard. And repeating something um, often indicates to somebody that they don't feel like they've been heard and understood. Uh, in terms of grief, it's really hard to understand why some things happen.
yeah,
And sometimes people have to tell that story over again, not only to try to feel like others in their support system hear and understand, but also sometimes to understand themselves. They keep telling themselves until they figure out, why can't I let this go? Um, and so that's an important step for people. When I work with people in counseling,
mhm,
sometimes we'll go back to that same issue
yeah,
2, 3, 4 times. Um, and my response to them is not, "We already did that, let's move on."
right.
It's, "We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I'm wondering what's bringing it up right now. Let's talk about um, the reason, the function of this behavior coming back up. What triggered it? Um, and what is it that you need to feel like you can move to acceptance of what happened?"
Mm,
The grief process is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. We don't go through it linearly. You know,
mhm,
when
right,
my parent, yeah, when my parents got their diagnoses and when they died, um, I bounced back and forth from denial to depression to anger and back to denial again. There was the longest time
wow.
after daddy died that I just refused to go back down there, because in my mind, daddy was still there.
Mhm.
Um, and maybe I've got daddy issues too. I don't know. But
I think we all
when
do.
when I found out that their house had been sold, that's when it suddenly hit me that,
Mm,
oh my gosh, this is actually real. And a lot of things in our life, any change can cause grief, and recognizing what it is you're grieving or what it is you need. When you keep telling somebody something, or
mm,
somebody's, maybe you're going to different people, going, somebody's got to hear me at some point, because I need support. I need somebody to say, I get you. I may not agree with you. I may agree with you. It doesn't matter, but I get you. And
yeah,
I'm here to be that be that safety net that can hear you and help you figure out where to go from here.
wow. That's beautifully said. Um, I like that. What do you think about that? Living grave. Wait.
And I agree with you, Maria. Um, if you tell a story a lot of times, it loses its power over others and you. In trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is an approach that's used with children who've experienced trauma, they
Oh.
actually have to write out a narrative of what happened and then tell it to their therapist and process it. And then they have to tell it to their parents and process it. But they have to, if you've told something that's painful multiple times, you know how every time you tell it, it tends to have less emotional valence. It tends to become more academic.
Mhm.
Um, Now, the cautionary tale is, if you keep telling it just so it doesn't hurt anymore and you don't process everything that's underneath.
Mm,
Um, but most of the time, uh, if you haven't processed it, you're going to keep having to tell it, because that um, sinkhole in
Yeah.
your heart is just going to keep emerging itself.
Oops. Right. Absolute. Don't give it power. Yes. Well, the thing I always said is like, I always say don't it takes the power out of it when I take something that has power over me and release it. And whether that means it means being authentic and sharing it or being vulnerable, like something about that is so cathartic for me.
Sharing it, as well as, going back to the serenity prayer,
Yeah.
accepting the things we cannot change and having the courage to change the things we can. Sometimes things that really suck, we just have no ability to change, and coming to that acceptance that, you know what, this can be awful right
Mhm.
now, and I can want it feels like it's taking my power, it's taking my joy, and that's okay. I can survive that. I'm
Yeah.
not going to like it, but I can survive it. And that can be really liberating, especially when you start looking back over it and you go, look at all the crap I've come through.
Yep.
Dang. I'm like Arnold Schwarzenegger mentally. Um, but so that can be another thing that uh, can help people.
Is it hard for men to be vulnerable? Is it from society? That's a big one. That's a long one, isn't it?
Society teaches a lot of people, or taught a lot of people in my generation,
Yeah.
that men are supposed to be the strong silent type or whatever. But it's also important to remember, if you go back to the MBTI, the temperament,
Mhm.
a lot of men, like 60%, so we're not saying all of them by any means, 60% of men are thinkers. And when something goes wrong, they want to fix it. They
Yeah.
don't they don't spend a lot of time dwelling on feelings. When I work with law enforcement, we call it the F word. All
Yeah.
right, you're not going to have to talk about the F word today. And they're all like, well, damn. Then, so it's important to recognize what someone else is doing that makes them feel vulnerable. You may not perceive as vulnerability because it's not how you communicate. And that's one of the reasons the five love languages became such a blockbuster,
Mhm.
was because uh, he helped us recognize that based on how we experienced love, or the deficits that we had for some people, is how we experience love now. And for some people, it's physical touch. For some people, it's gifts. For others, it's acts of service. And each person tends to communicate they love somebody in their own love language,
Yeah.
which may fall on deaf ears. So the question is, what does vulnerability mean to you, Scooby Doo?
Mhm.
Um, uh,
We love Scooby Doo.
and how can you, in terms of increasing vulnerability, what is it that you would want to see? It's kind of like when I tell my kids, you need to clean your room. Well, their definition of clean and mine is very different. um, so saying, I want you to be more vulnerable, what does that look like to you? And they may not be comfortable using words like happy, sad, elated, whatever. But listening when they say, I was over the moon, or I was so excited, or it felt like somebody punched me in the gut. Well, that's sort of feeling words. But being aware when they are trying to share, um, and validating that. I really appreciate you taking that step and sharing that with me. It can go a long way, and just being open and receptive and trying to listen. If there are things you want them to do more to be more vulnerable, when they get anywhere close to it, anywhere close to it, validate that behavior. Oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me, or it makes me feel special that you said that. Um, rewarding that behavior will increase the likelihood that it will happen again.
You're genius. You are a genius.
I minored in behavior modification, so.
I love it. Does anybody have any other questions about anything? Did I forget anything? There's other stuff I wanted to, I just can't remember. I'm so into this right now. Did I forget any questions up there? Or is there any others that you guys have before the good doctor has to?
And May is actually Mental Health Month.
Mhm.
So on my channel, I'm probably going to be doing live Q&As at least once a week. So we need to coordinate our schedules so we don't stomp on each other. But if any of y'all want to come to those, and you know, I do it very much the same way, where it's a I guess it's a write-in, what your questions are, and I tried to provide some guidance and direction. But yeah.
Please she
You're so sweet, Jean.
she has helped me through a lot of the past couple of years. Really, really, really cool. And we've never met in person. It just happens to be that we made a connection on here. It's pretty cool. I put I like that. You guys, so there's in the video description, I have all her stuff too. And after she answered this, I'll tell you more. But he said, I'm interested to hear if there's a relationship between vulnerability and shame. At least for me, certain things I find shameful make me vulnerable, and I don't reveal them. Same.
Well, I'm hearing two different questions. Number one, vulnerability and shame. If you were raised to believe that being vulnerable, not being in control was shameful, then yeah, there is a direct correlation to that. If you are not in control, then you are inadequate. And right. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's the message you got. And then things that you find shameful make you vulnerable. Things that you find shameful, and I do a lot with porn addiction. And a lot of people struggle with shame surrounding porn addiction. And because of the shame of that behavior, they feel unlovable in some way, and they're afraid if anybody finds out, they're going to be rejected. So yeah, shameful behaviors can lead you to feeling vulnerable to rejection. Back to the whole behaviors serve a purpose and their communication, exploring what the things are that you find shameful. Where did you get that message? Who told you that? Who taught you that? And do you believe it? It's not for me to say whether it's shameful or not. That's a value judgment you've got to make in your own brain. But critically evaluating the things that we've been told over our lives that prompt guilt and shame, and going, is that accurate? Do I believe that in this context at this time? Maybe 50 years ago, okay, it was a different story. Or in the Amish culture, might be a different story. But what do I believe for me in this context?
Yes. Oh, that's perfect. What else? Pete asked, what video should we start on your channel to get a grasp on what you do and what you're about?
Do you have an answer for that, Pete?
Let me see.
Or I'm sorry, not Pete, but
yes. So the thing is, okay, so she has like category, like playlist of every single, there's addiction. The addiction one is obviously the one I went straight to. And then the co-occurring disorders and things like that. But so she has stuff of like inner child that really helped me, stuff on PTSD. It was really, really helpful. It's I don't know if there really was. I just kind of started clicking around at different things that I was interested in.
Well, and one thing I will tell you is, I was going to try to put it in the chat, but I can't figure out how to do that.
I can have
if you go to DocSnipes.com / DocSnipes-AI.
Is that right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
That is my, I guess they call it a language model. I just call it my AI. And it has been educated with all 1,700 of my videos. And so you can ask it questions and it will give you an answer in text, but it also provides inline citations to exactly where in the video, in different videos that I talk about it. I find it useful. I even use it for myself. I'm like, what video was that I talked about that?
Oh,
But for people who are looking for answers to specific questions or who just want to start asking questions to see what they come up with, that might be a useful place to start. And then you can, obviously, like Lindsay said, I have on the front page of my YouTube channel, I do have several playlists. The one on codependency seems to be really popular too. I have another one on PTSD and CPTSD. So
yes.
wherever.
Wow, I didn't know about the AI thing. That's so cool. That's really, really cool. And you guys, so all CEUs is also her website where so she trains so CEUs continuing education. Will you explain that to them? I just had someone sign up for it yesterday, he told me. For
Awesome.
I forget which one though. It was one of the addiction ones because you guys, so I'm a certified addiction counselor in Florida and then internationally a drug addiction counselor or alcohol and drug addiction counselor. And I'm also a certified behavioral health technician in Florida. And so you have to have CEUs, I think nurses and stuff too, not just the mental health field and addiction have to, right? So you have to go to an approved, here, you can explain that because I don't want to say it wrong.
Well, there are two things. I offer the pre-certification training on my website for everything. All the different certifications that are offered by most state boards. There are a few that I've missed, but definitely all the ones in Florida and Tennessee and Pennsylvania. And I think there was another, Virginia. But so I have the pre-certification training there, which is that approved training. Once you get certified, then you need a certain number of hours of training every year or 2 years, depending on your state, to maintain your license. And that's what we call continuing education. And we offer those as well. So we try to make sure that there's affordable, evidence-based, trauma-informed continuing education that's available.
You guys, that's what I use. So I think I have the unlimited one for the addiction, but I have to renew my license like literally before June or whatever, but they already sent me an email and everything. And so I'm like, all right. So I have to do some CEUs and I have access to her. So I'm going to do that. But so people ask me all the time, how did you become a certified addiction counselor? Well, it's a lot. If you don't know where to start. So this is where you guys should start if you're really interested in it. And I have a code on there for to think 10% off for LV 2024, and that's in the video description. If you sign up, and if you have any questions, you can ask her too. There's a spot on the website to ask her specific questions about the certifications. And so the thing is too, she already has it. There's certain trainings you have to have, and she has them all structured out there. And it's really helpful. And I wish like back in 2015, when I first got my first one, I would have done it this way because it was a pain in the butt to try to do it otherwise, because you have to try to match them. And this is the easier way to go. Just trust me. So use my code and you can get 10% off. And then what else did I forget with that?
The unlimited CEU membership qualifies for, gives you access to my live Wednesday webinars that I do every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Some states require that some of your hours are live. Florida doesn't, thank God. But Tennessee does. Tennessee actually requires 80% of your hours to be live. I know, right? So if you're interested, I also recently did a live Q&A on how do I become an addiction counselor. It's on the channel. So, good. And I talk you through some of the steps on how to do it. It's really once you recognize that you can do it, and you can become a certified addiction professional in most states without a bachelor's degree.
I need your help.
Now, to get up to a higher level where you can practice independently, you have to have a bachelor's. But in no state that I can think of, right off the top of my head, does it require a master's degree.
Right.
So for people who are not into going to college for a million years, addiction counseling is great. We know that the addiction epidemic is not going away, and gambling addiction is just going to get 10 times worse. They're actually talking about making the stock market tradable 24 hours a day. So it's not just crypto, but the stock market. So we're going to have a lot of people losing their life savings and developing addictions, which just breaks my heart. But then we've also got porn and everything else out there. So there's going to be plenty of demand for jobs. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says it's growing. We're supposed to add between now and 2030, 78,000 new jobs.
Wow.
And they can't fill the ones they've got right now. They're offering like insane hiring bonuses at a lot of places.
I know, it's pretty cool. Well, that's so the thing is too, so you have to get it. I always thought you had to get in a related field. And so like, I'm almost to the end now of my bachelor's. I'm doing the capstone, which is like the end of it. But I had to go on and get the addiction studies before I could get accepted into the bachelor's. So if you guys, if she has a way to do that, please, it will save you so much time. It's taking me so many years because of all the qualifications that I needed to get in to do something appropriate. Anyways, so it's just much easier that way.
If you have questions, you can message me at support@allceus.com. Mrs. J, if you would be kind enough to put that in.
Thank you.
Then I can help kind of direct you to the right website for whatever state you happen to be in. I'm less familiar with other countries. So if you're in Canada or somewhere else, the whole continent of Africa, I'm good with, and the USA, I'm good with, as far as my knowledge of what needs to be done. But other countries, I'm a little bit, I can point you in the right direction, but I won't have any solid answers.
Well, I think this has been very necessary for me to have you on here for myself, and I hope you guys got something out of it, but I got a lot out of it. So
well, I enjoyed being here. I'd love to be back sometime if y'all want to have me back.
You have no idea. Yeah, I would have you on every day if I could. There was one last thing I wanted to say, and I forgot because that's what I do. But yes, subscribe. Video description has all of her YouTube information, and what was it? support@allceus.com.
Yes.
Here, I got it too. allceus.com. One last thing I want to say is that a lot of the reason that I will I go with her, obviously, well, because I trust you, but and I know you're legit, but there are so many people online that have their fraudulence, be a counselor, schools even, and so please be careful on there. That's why, like, I'm in with her. I use her. I know it's legit. There's so many people that they will say you can be an addiction counselor, and it's just these classes. You have to have something that correlates with your board. There's a whole board. It's not an easy process if you don't know, if you're trying to do it on your own, right? So you have to like try to figure out some direction here. And I don't know every state either. That's the most common question I get. And I'm like, I don't know every state and how to go about it. I could figure it out, but I know Florida, so I can help anybody with applications there too.
And what you have to do is Google addiction counseling board and then the name of your state, and that will bring up that board. And then you can start trying to sort through it and find out what needs to be done to get certified. There are a couple of states, I'm thinking Missouri might be one of them, where people have to get their training. They can't get it through me. They have to get their training through a university. But on my website, I have on the top menu bar, I have a little link for approvals, and then you can click on the map and figure out whether it's necessary in your state, whether our CEUs and trainings are accepted. We're accepted in 47 states. So
Beautiful.
There are just a couple outliers.
Yeah. So seriously, you guys, if you are interested in doing that, please go with her. She's been the only one that I've been able to even direct people to, because there's so much out there that is just not legitimate. Do you recommend an addict go through this program as a means of recovery?
Interesting question. In Florida, for example, there's something called the Certified Peer Recovery Specialist. And we've actually had a couple of treatment centers start signing up their clients who are in the final stages of their recovery process. They're finishing up IOP or finishing up a 90-day residential. And the CPRS training, I think, is only like 40 hours. It's not like it's clock hours. It's not super, super long. I feel it's beneficial to get the education. Now, whether you go through the training and get all the certificates where you have to pay for it, or you just watch the videos on YouTube,
right,
doesn't really matter to me. And I don't think it matters to the person who's in recovery. But I think getting some information you probably didn't hear when you were in treatment, and some slightly different perspectives on it can help you solidify your relapse prevention plan, and be more aware and understanding of what's going on in your mind as well as in your body as you're recovering.
Yes, I'm in recovery, you guys know. Well, some of you might not know, some new people. I'm in recovery as well, and I'm in this field. And so it has helped me immensely. I am constantly learning, and I got the certifications because that's just what I decided to do. I want to have a permanent spot in this career. And so yes, Fred signed up. Yeah, he messaged me earlier about it.
Thank you, Fred. And yes, thank you, Jean.
Where is it? But yeah, I would personally recommend it. Just to find out. I'm always trying to find out new stuff, and I'll watch the videos on the app to just learn, because she actually knows what she's talking about. A lot of people don't.
And if nothing else, I'm kind of amusing. This is Brewster.
Hi, Brewster.
Hi to the people. Yes. Okay, get down.
So funny.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. I know Scooby. It's a hard life. I love Scooby. Oh, I love you. I'm glad you got something out of it. Thanks.
I appreciate all of you giving me your time today and attending, because I know this is not necessarily your typical or Lindsay's typical show. So I appreciate you all giving me a chance and coming. And I do answer as many support. I do answer the support tickets, all of them. And I also respond to as many comments on videos as I can. As you can imagine, with 400,000 subscribers, sometimes it can get a little bit daunting, but we do try to actually, if you take the time to write, we try to take the time to respond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always see you in there responding to all of them too. That's amazing. I love it. And she's coming back on. I'm declaring it now, so you have to. Thank you so much.